As much as we love creating, it's hard to get into it sometimes. How many times have you sat down, finally able to spare a few minutes to work on your project, and you just stare at the page? You bring your pencil up and glide it along the paper, but you feel nothing. You have no ideas and have no inspiration. Perhaps even in this moment you have motivation. You finished things early, you cleared time in your schedule, but now, in this moment, your mind is blank and you don't know what to do. Maybe it's been like this for a while and you've been trying hard for days to come up with ideas, watching the same old movies that get you excited and nothing. You have no ideas. Your mind is simply blocked. In this episode, we will be talking about art block, exploring some reasons why it happens, how we think about it, and some strategies that we can use to combat it. If this sounds like your cup of tea, please consider subscribing. Well, first of all, what is art block? Let's define it before we spend half an hour analyzing. For the purposes of our discussion today, art block is the condition experienced by artists when they encounter a significant inability to generate new ideas or produce creative work. This condition is a mental and/or emotional barrier that hinders the artistic process in general, making all of its components more difficult, if not impossible, to manage. Art block often presents itself as a lack of inspiration or motivation, frustration, feeling stuck, self-doubt, or simply lacking the desire or ability to engage in normal, imaginative, and innovative tasks. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it's a complicated thing. It's not quite as simple as, I don't have any ideas, and it's also not quite as simple as, I just don't want to work. I feel stuck. Okay, so why does it happen then? Let's start off by going over some potential causes and some of our normal catalysts that can lead us into this ailment. And please bear with me as well, I've had a sore throat for 2 weeks, but I am making do. The first thing here is too much pressure. Much of our art comes with pressure, often substantial quantities of it. Depending where you are in your art journey, this pressure can come from many places. Perhaps the first and most problematic for this is internal pressure. We as artists have a tendency to push ourselves really hard, to have really high expectations for what we can do and what we should be able to. I know this is something that many of us encounter in other areas of our life as well, right? Like you have a whole day and you look at the house and go, I can do all these things. I can make this meal and I can clean this room and I can do the laundry. And then you get to the end of the day and you got done like maybe 20% of that. I think we do this with our artwork as well, but perhaps we're harder on ourselves with the whole process. I should be able to finish Inktober in my first go. I should be able to fill this entire sketchbook. I should be able to paint 3 paintings a week. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe that's logical, but that doesn't account for your emotional state. It doesn't account for how the last piece went, and it doesn't account for life. We have a tendency to apply a lot of internal pressure to ourselves, and sometimes our brain or our body can just seize up as a way of protecting ourselves. And that internal pressure then can lead to something like art block. External pressures are just as common. Sometimes those pressures come from parents and friends. Your parents maybe want you to go in a particular place in your life and they feel like your painting or your drawing is just not gonna get you there. It's not gonna take care of what you need. It's not gonna give you a job that's going to give you an income that's gonna get you out of their basement. Whatever it might be. Maybe your friends have expectations that you'll do things with them, that you'll make lots of art because that's what they like doing. Whatever it is, parents and friends can have a lot of impact on the potential for art block in our lives because we care about what they think. We care about their opinions. Sometimes we want to impress them. Sometimes we want to have them be proud of us. I don't know that there's anything really intrinsically wrong with these things, but those pressures can mount tremendously over time, and they can lead to art block because, again, our mind just seizes up when we get past a certain point. It's almost like shock, but a more minor case of it in most scenarios. Almost a fight or flight scenario, but we often talk about fight or flight, and really it's fight or flight or freeze. There's 3 options, and art block a lot of times is just a freeze response to external pressures. Sometimes your school, your teachers, your mentors can put that pressure on you. Sometimes this comes in the form of being more like them. I had a couple teachers that I ran into when I was at college that really wanted every one of their students to work just like them. Now, I could go into the psychology of how that probably is that they feel insecure about their own work and they want to feel better about themselves, and having a whole bunch of minions who work just like them will be really good at serving their ego. But it could just be that that's the way they work and that's the way they think everyone should work, because there's a kind of childish logic to that, right? There's a childish logic to thinking that it works for me, so therefore it would also work for my students. And so sometimes that pressure comes from teachers in a loving way, sometimes it comes from teachers in a really terrible ego-feeding way. But again, it can lead to the same things that the past two pressures can as well. Society and culture sometimes presses on us. This has come up in recent podcasts and even in some of the comments in some of my videos and podcasts, where people have been talking about the societal pressures and the cultural pressures toward art. A lot of times this takes the form of you shouldn't be doing art at all. You should be doing things that are more worth your time. And sometimes when you're older, the pressure is less that you shouldn't be doing art, but the art that you're doing should be productive. It should be toward a particular end. And also, if you're working in galleries, if you have clients, if you work in the artistic field in general, you probably have the pressure from your boss, the pressure from your clients, the pressure from your comrades in arms, from your companions who are working alongside of you. All of those things can just push on you so hard that you seize up. Well, what are some things we can do about that? What are some counters to too much pressure? First of all, understand the pressure and where it's coming from, and that can help to start dismantling it, even if just a little bit. Understanding that the pressures are coming from particular places and that they're not just native to art making can sometimes psychologically unhinge some of that pressure and let it fall away. Make sure you are not taking more pressure than you need to. You often don't need to fulfill the expectations of many people beyond yourself, your teacher, or your client. And sometimes even yourself, the teacher, or client can be applying more pressure than is necessary. Try to let those other pressures fall away, wrapping your head around what they are and realizing that they inhibit the creative work. Easier said than done, but none of this is easy. The next potential catalyst for art block is undefined ambitions and goals. It's so easy to just work on our art and not think about what our ambitions are, what we really desire at the end of the day. And I think ambitions are different from goals. Goals are pretty static, right? The goal is to produce your comic, to finish your book, to finish this painting, to be able to work as a professional artist. And they might be difficult topics like those. They might be ethereal, things that take years to work toward or that have hundreds of subdividable goals underneath them. Ambition, however, is harder. What is the reason behind wanting to finish your book? What is the reason behind wanting to be a professional artist if it's not just to make money? Those things are going to be more tied into your ambition. My ambition is to tell stories. I have things that I have to get out of my brain or I'm going to slowly go crazy. And it's better for me and all those around me if I can do that. That's what you're watching happen in the background here. That's more of an ambition than a goal. The specific goal would be to take illustrations like this and to build a children's book out of them, which hopefully I will finish this year. That would be lovely. That's more of a goal. And the reality is both are good, both are necessary, but if they're undefined, it's easy to find yourself encountering art block because you're not really taking steps towards the things that you want, or you just don't know where you're stepping. A lack of direction is largely what contributes to this. Because if you have those ambitions and goals defined, you can start walking toward them. Otherwise, it's too easy to meander. And maybe you're making progress towards those goals, but it is not a straight path. So, when you're not sure what you want to be working toward or why, these problems can occur. An undefined or empty desire to simply be better is what a lot of us have. And I've had this for years. I'm very guilty of this. For a long period of my life, my artistic goal, if someone had asked me, was just, I want to just get better. But that's really ethereal. It doesn't hold water. It's like a basket that you're trying to fill up and take water back to the camp. It's not going to help you in the long run unless that getting better is tied into something else. So for me, the getting better is tied into illustrating my graphic novel eventually, illustrating a children's book, and being able to tell my stories. Those are more corporeal. They're easier for me to actually wrap my head around, and then I can subdivide. Instead of focusing on getting better at drawing everything, I can focus on getting better at drawing specific things that will help me achieve those goals. And then, hopefully pick up the pieces and finally learn anatomy really well later on. So what is the counter to the undefined ambitions and goals? Seems a little bit logical, but build and maintain goals. Understand them. Keep a document somewhere for what you want to achieve, and then break that down into the ways of getting there. Subdivide your goals. If you need help setting goals, check out my video on designing and building goals. It's going to be linked in the description. I won't take more time here. I focus on it a lot. I think it's really, really important. Another thing that can lead to art block is too much freedom. This might sound a little bit strange because we as artists love freedom. The liberal arts are called the liberal arts because liberal really ties back into the original meaning of freedom, us having the ability to do what we want or just to not be constrained. But too much freedom can be crippling as an artist. It is so easy to get excited and dive in when there are no boundaries, but often this just makes everything more difficult. I ran into this so many times with my students, and I didn't believe it until I actually did it, until I put my students through these scenarios. Obviously, when you are in a class and your teacher gives you a project, it's pretty natural for kids to complain about those. I did when I was in college, I did when I was in high school. You know, maybe it was the medium. Well, this project sounds really cool, but I'd rather do it in watercolor than acrylic. I feel like that would be a better medium. No, you can't. The project is not within those confines. The project has to be acrylic. Maybe the subject was too constrained. Whatever it is, if you've been in an art class, you have likely grumbled either out loud or in your head about the nature of the project. So after taking this for a couple years with my middle and high school students, I eventually gave them a project, a final, either for semester or for the end of the year, and just went, okay, you can do whatever you want. I just need you to write up what it is you want. I need you to give me some thumbnails, and we'll move forward. I thought I was doing them a huge favor. They were so excited about the fact that they could do whatever they wanted. But you know what happened? After a week of them sorting through ideas and working on things, most of them were just drowning in the idea of what they could do. Now, some of them were great. Some of them just picked up the pieces and moved forward and were executing amazing things. A lot of them came up with really ambitious ideas, and then when they started to actually construct what that would look like, they fell apart. And some were just totally overwhelmed by the fact that they had ultimate freedom. They could do whatever they want. So I realized over time that although we yearn for freedom as artists, often it is more inhibiting than actually having a project with boundaries and specific requirements. So, if you have too much freedom in your artistic life, there are things that you can do to make it easier for you to work through things. If you're in classes, lean into the boundaries given by the assignments and the projects. These are going to be the counters to too much freedom. If you are working professionally, your client or boss is likely giving you many restrictions already, so you're likely fine. They are fences to keep you safe. And if you are just working for yourself, try giving yourself assignments and projects. Find art challenges like Inktober and the hundreds of others that pop up on Instagram and other places. Don't let yourself drown in the infinite. Give yourself some boundaries. For me, that looks like the big projects that I do for my podcasts. It looks like the paintings that I'm working on as I try to get into galleries and sell my work. I have boundaries on those things. Obviously, the size of the canvas and the medium alone are boundaries. Digital sometimes is a little bit scary and intimidating because there are essentially no boundaries. You can do so many different things. So if this is a struggle for you, if too much freedom is giving you art block, hone in on something specific or find someone else to give you an assignment. That might be kind of a fun thing too. I would be happy to give assignments and projects just as weekly little things. If you guys would be interested in that, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to do it. I used to do it for my students. I could probably post them on Monday, and then once we get the Discord live, we could actually have things show up in there where you could show like, hey, you know, it was a machine that controlled the weather. That was this week's prompt, and here's my execution of it. So if that's something that sounds exciting or fun, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Exhaustion and burnout are perhaps some of the most common causes of art block. Maybe you've been doing the same thing for far too long. You've overmined this category for ideas and you find yourself blank. This happens when you have dedicated yourself to the same thing for a long time, and it is sometimes inevitable if you've been working on a massive project. Exhaustion is understandable. It can be really hard to come up with ideas to push forward on anything if you are tired, and we tend to push ourselves really hard. We, as artists, have a tendency to work very odd hours, to stay up late finishing things because we're excited, to get up too early, to not get up until the afternoon. Our schedules are very odd, and what this can often lead to is exhaustion, particularly because we tend to put our artistic endeavors far in front of the priority of our own physical health. Things like sleep, Eating well, even hydration, fall off because we're so excited about whatever it is that we're working on. And so our creativity, our imagination can often lead us straight into exhaustion. We are too tired, we are too worn out because of all of our wonderful things. And so we just find ourselves in a place where we can't conjure the energy to work on art. We can't conjure the mental energy to come up with new ideas. Sometimes this takes the form of burnout as well. And burnout often lingers. It waits to ambush us as the partner of exhaustion. It's all too easy to find yourself burnt out if you have not had the opportunity to take breaks or if you've chosen not to take care of yourself. The reality of burnout is an exhaustive topic in and of itself. And so if I have not yet hit on that with a podcast, eventually I will have Art Burnout as its entire own podcast. This is something that is probably one of the most frequent topics I see brought up by other creators, and so it's something that I will touch on at some point. What is the counter then to exhaustion or burnout? Keep an eye on yourself. Make sure you value your mental and physical health enough, because the reality is, even if you don't want to value those things very much, valuing those things will allow you to create more consistently, and to get more things out there. Make sure that you take care of your physical health, that you get enough sleep, and that you don't let burnout creep up. Burnout rarely shows up on your front doorstep without sending some letters ahead of time. Usually there's indicators, and if you're watching yourself, if you're paying attention to your own body and mind, you will often see burnout long before it hits you. This is hard. We push ourselves a lot when it comes to our creativity. It's part of our nature, but it's also important to just take care of yourself. Another cause of art block can be that we are too hard on our ideas. We have high levels of self-doubt and we lack confidence when it comes to the ideas that we construct, that the things that come out of our brains. We're often so forgiving and so gracious, and we can even extrapolate from other people's ideas, but we're often very, very hard on our own. Sometimes it's because we're too perfectionistic. We lean that way too much. We expect our ideas to be perfect right out of the gate, and the reality is very little is perfect artistically, if ever, in any scenario. We often over-compare ourselves and our ideas to other people's work. The weird reality here is that when you look at someone else's idea, you're usually looking at a finished product. You don't know what the original idea was. You look at that painting and go, oh my goodness, that's an amazing idea. It's so cool, but you don't really know if that's where the idea started. And the reality is, from your own work, if you look at how you've come up with ideas in the past, how often is your final product exactly the same as the original idea? Very, very seldom. I'd say maybe 10% of the time that happens. And even when it does, it's because you were doing a lot of work in the background in your mind. You were constructing things, fabricating things, and working on things. So remember, when you compare your own ideas and your artwork to other people, you're just seeing the final product. You don't have any idea how many times they iterated on a thing, how many drafts they did. If it's a painting, you don't know how many layers there are. And if it's a digital piece, you know nothing. You really just know nothing. Well, what is the counter then to being too hard on our ideas? Allow yourself to have bad ideas. Everyone has them. They're part of the process. They're not anathema to it. Let your bad ideas build up into good ones. Often, like clay, your bad ideas will just build up over time, and they become something that can be utilized. I have done lots and lots of drawings of different kinds of creatures and robots and characters, and usually each one of those, the first time I will draft something, is kind of intriguing by like one feature. Like one feature stands out and it's cool. After I develop 3 or 4 or 5 of those, then I can often take them and take pieces out of all of them and homogenize it and make something that's more intriguing. I'm running into that now too with my writing. I often write characters that are pretty flat, or at least they have only one defining aspect at the beginning, and then as I write them, as I play with them in my head, they start to accumulate other things. My initial ideas are often pretty boring, but they get other pieces as time goes on. These characters start to take on aspects of me, aspects of people that I'm close to, and I think that our artwork does the same thing. Our ideas are usually an assemblage of many pieces if we want them to be good. So allow yourself to have bad ideas, utilize the ideas from bad things. The big thing here is learning to be okay with your ideas, all of them, and then mining where goodness shows up. Sometimes art block just happens because you finished something big, something that you had put a lot of expectations into. Sometimes after you complete a large project, after you finish a series, or you get out of school, you just feel drained. You used up your ideas, and here you are, feeling the eyes of everyone around you waiting for the next big thing, and your pockets just feel empty. This makes a lot of sense if you can pull yourself out of the moment and think about it. You were dedicated to something big, dedicating a large amount of your time and mental powers toward a particular end, and now that it is done, it's just not that weird that you need some time to recover. It might be as simple as your other ideas need tending. They might have been neglected for a while, and because you were so hyper-focused on a single thing, they now need to come to the top of your priority list and get some affection. And they're also not going to be ready to move forward with at the drop of a hat. Sometimes the end of a thing is just that, and sometimes that can lead to a sense of art block, a hole where you feel the ideas should be and where ideas and inspiration are simply not right now. And this is really common. It occurs, I think, largely because a different part of our brain is engaged when we're starting art versus when we're finishing art. For me, the joy-filled part of the creation process is really right at the beginning, coming up with the ideas and being really excited about it. And then once I'm in the meat of a thing, like I really dislike starting a drawing and a painting. I like once all of my guidelines are there, once some of the difficult stuff has been handled and I can just focus on actually executing. There's this flow state that occurs. There's the dreadful minutia that people often hate that I love is, oh, I'm painting a bird. Well, I've got the eyes and the beak handled, and those are kind of the difficult parts. And now I just get to paint feathers for 3 hours, and that sounds lovely. I'm going to put on some music or a podcast and just move forward. So sometimes you've just been in that state for so long that you get to the end of the project and you just can't shift immediately. Sometimes a day break will be just enough, just what the doctor ordered to move on. But what are some other counters for this? Think about this time period before you finish the big project. So if you can work ahead in your mind, do this. Have something else waiting for your time, already thought through, prepped, and planned. Or prep and plan for a break. There's no problem taking breaks. It's just you're going to feel better about them if that was the plan and not just what you stumbled into. Don't let this period blindside you. If you do on accident, then go back to whatever is easiest and most relaxing artistically. Spend some time there. I will likely be finishing the first draft of my novel in the next few months, and I already have a month-long break from it planned after I finish. In this period, I'm going to be working on short stories and studying writing instead, and then I'll dive back into editing and starting the second novel after that. But I'm not going to dive straight into the next big thing. I need to kind of let myself live in that almost like the weird sorrow of finishing a thing. And I know that I need to sit there. I can't just dive into the next thing or my expectations will be all over the place and I'll be prone to disappointment and it just won't be great. So make sure that you plan for this. And if you end up there accidentally, you didn't plan ahead, just kind of understand that a break's okay and just allow yourself that break and go back to some things that are really, really easy for you to engage in. Well, those are some of the myriad potential causes of art block. I did not cover all of them, I am sure, so if there are others I have left out, others that are important to you, please include them in the comments below. Moving out of causes, let's talk about something fundamental to any of these kinds of struggles: how we think about and contextualize art block. For such a difficult and loaded subject, it's quite important to reframe how we think about things. It's important at the very least to understand how we think about it. So how can we think about art block more productively? So what I've included here is going to be several different ways of thinking about art block, trying to reformat how our brain interacts with it. The likelihood is that not all of these will apply to you, but I'm hopeful that one or two will. Here's the first. It is natural. Art block is natural. It's not weird. For many of us, it is simply a part of the process. It creeps up at regular intervals, it shows its face, it lingers for a while, and it disappears. Most of us don't sit here forever, or, we wouldn't be artists. Eventually, you would step away, the art block would fade into nothingness because you haven't been working on your art, and then you would re-engage at some point. There's nothing wrong with you because you have art block, because you're experiencing this ailment. This is just a normal part of creation for so many people. Likely, it's going to show up again in the future, so you can prep for it. It's something you should anticipate and understand. And this is just part of the normal creative process. You can think about it as a chance to take a little break. And don't be hard on yourself about it. Like I mentioned earlier, planned breaks are a really good thing. Our brains need them sometimes, and our bodies too. Sometimes we need the breaks, and sometimes the breaks are earned. So again, if you've just finished a big thing, if you finished school, if you finished a series of classes, whatever it might be, whatever's big for you, sometimes you've earned that break. Now, I think the most beneficial thing is to make sure that you don't take an infinite break. Make sure that you have some semblance of a plan for when it ends and how it's going to function. So if you do that, just make sure you have a plan to re-engage at some point. There's a reason that runners and athletes take breaks, right? Why authors recommend stepping away from a project you finish before coming back to it, why vacations exist in the first place. We as humans need breaks. We can't keep doing the same thing all the time indefinitely. We're just not built that way. I know that there are a lot of people who push the concept of drawing every day, writing every day, engaging in your art practice every single day. There's a lot of wisdom in that. And I think the wisdom really is that if you plan to do it every day and you miss a couple days, you still hit most days. So understand that sometimes art block is just a wonderful, disguised opportunity to take a break. And maybe you need one. You can also think of it as a time to reflect and reevaluate. Anytime you are stopped in your tracks from something, you have the opportunity to be introspective, to dive into yourself and think about the why behind things. Why are you doing this? Are the reasons the same as they were months or years ago? If not, do things need to adjust, or do you need to get back to some old habits? You likely don't want to find yourself 5 years down the road when you should have taken a left turn all those years ago. I do this constantly, but not everyone does. It's not because I'm better than anyone, it's just my brain can't stop overthinking all the time. So I'm always trying to process, what am I doing? Is it productive? Is this still working toward my goal? But sometimes art block is a beneficial thing because it will stop you dead in your tracks and give you an opportunity to analyze where you are now and where you want to be. And only by making those decisions are you going to be able to change course and make sure you're actually doing what you want to be doing. Art block happens to almost all of us, if not all of us. Some of us more frequently than others, but it seems to happen to all artists and creatives at some point in their journey. Learning how to deal with it, how to respond to it, is just another step for the artist moving down that path. Well, what can we do about art block? If you find yourself there, what are some things that you can do? So I threw in some quick counters to the causes earlier, but let's go a little bit more in depth here. Let's start with some practical strategies, and then we'll move into preemptive approaches. So we'll start with things that if you find yourself here right now and you need like emergency help, we'll go over some of those. And then the next batch of things will be, let's try to prevent this from happening in the first place. So let's problem solve first. Here are the practical strategies that I have for today. And of course, this can't be exhaustive because humans are complicated. Change to something different. If there are any dregs of energy left in your tank, use them to get you onto a different set of tracks and keep moving. Often, though it's painful, the best thing that we can do when we feel like we're hitting an art block is to keep moving forward. You don't have to move with force or push hard, you just need to do something, anything. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, so unless you decided to actively take a break, perhaps moving on to something else will be of bigger benefit to you. This is difficult. There's a little bit of wanting to have some pity, and I don't mean that in a condescending way at all, but there's a lot of people who end up here and they unconsciously put themselves into a pitiable situation. And the reality is, if you want to keep making art, sometimes just moving forward, even if it's slowly, even if it's something a little bit different, is really beneficial for you. This is something that I would often do with my students. If I had them before they were about to graduate, when the stress was just piling up, often art block would show up because the stress was mounting. All these external pressures were coming on them. So if they couldn't work on the piece that they had to finish for their AP Studio portfolio, sometimes I would just push them towards something a little bit more juvenile. That's not quite the right word, but something lower stakes. So just work on some sketchbook stuff, work on some studies, work on some gesture drawings, just something to keep your hands moving. Inevitably, what ended up happening was they would fight, and then eventually they would succumb. They would work on something else, usually something smaller with smaller stakes. And after enough time, usually just a couple hours, they would feel inspired by something. They would have something new that would jump out at them, or they would remember how excited they were to do this particular thing, and that was usually enough of an ignition point for them to get back into their bigger projects. But pivoting is one of the best things that you can do. You can use Artblock as an excuse to study. Don't work on something demanding, simply study things. Copy birds for a while, do some figural sketches, go sit on your back porch and just draw clouds or something. Study the world around you. If you can do this rather than stopping making art, it might be to your benefit. I find studying far less stressful than most other work, so much so that I can actually find myself doing it for far longer than is productive, but if it keeps me moving, this seems like a miniature win. This is pretty similar to Pivot, but it's actually just a reduced version of whatever you would be doing normally. If normally you work on large commission pieces that are individuals' character designs, and you don't want to do that, you can just study someone else's character designs for a while. You can study cloth, you can study facial expressions. I find, and I think most of us do as well, working from reference and working on things that are low stakes like this is just less stressful. It's kind of relaxing. It's easy to throw on some music or a movie or Netflix, something or other, and just work. A lot of times when I'm working on complicated things, I have to eliminate some of those distractions because I need more of my brain power to actually focus. So if you are encountering art block right now, perhaps use this opportunity to study something. Don't force yourself to dive into another big project. Reach out to your community or a friend. Friends, they're not just for fun anymore. So reach out to people who get you, people who care, and just let them in on the stress and the situation. Sometimes sharing where you're at, just what you're feeling in a particular moment, can be the first step towards harnessing that energy for something productive and working through it. So talk to a friend that'll hear you out. Cultivating friendships is wonderful. We all need support, and if you are there for them, then whether they make art or not, they will listen to you. If you have artistic friends, this is likely going to be even more beneficial. I have several people I reach out to with artistic struggles and successes, people that share those burdens and joys with me, and then I try to do the same for them. No human is an island, and don't feel like you need to be. What about journaling? This is a great strategy for many people, to write your thoughts, to put things down onto paper, and to allow them to stare back at you. Sometimes this is simply cathartic and good for you in that aspect. Sometimes it actually helps you to work through issues, dissecting them as ink or keystrokes give them life. For some people, there is solace and benefit in coming back to these words later on and reading something from a past version of themselves. I'm not great at journaling. I give it a try every year or so, but I tend to only do it when I feel like my life is in chaos, so when things are good, I forget to do it. I know that it would be beneficial for me to leave my mark on pages every single day, and I guess actually I'm doing that with the novel that I'm working on right now, but I think about for my own benefit, journaling would be a good thing. And also, it would be a good thing for my loved ones to have if something terrible happened to me, or if I just live a long life and I've got this record of all these things. So I think there's a lot of benefits to journaling if you're able to do it. Maybe I'm the weird one here, but take a look and give it a try. Change your work environment. Whatever your normal is, change it. If you work in your room, go to a common space. Take headphones if you don't want to be bothered. If you work at home, try a coffee shop. There is a lot to be gained from shifting basic things like this in your life. I have a lovely studio, and I do much of my writing and art in here. But I work a lot at the dining room table or on a couch, and on occasion, I will go to a coffee shop. These subtle changes change how your brain perceives things. It's easy if you are stuck in the same old place to do the same old thing and think the same old way. Getting out of your normal can shuffle things around, and especially if you are feeling some creative block, the change in scenery can help. You can always try to just force it. Now, this practical strategy requires wisdom. Some of us can push past the discomfort, the lack of ideas, and simply do the work mindlessly and soullessly. This is epitomized by the phrase, fake it until you make it. This is not a good strategy for most people, or even perhaps for many people. Sometimes this will actually make the situation worse, so please know yourself and think about if this strategy will be helpful or harmful. For people who can push through and just do the work, you may find that forcing the wheel to turn can actually begin to reignite the desire to work. About half of the time I encounter a block of some kind, I can do this. Not always, And in the moment, I seem able to make the call. For me, it's dodging the self-pity or lack of confidence and pushing through even though it sucks. Just remember, this will not work for everyone, and you should not feel any shame. You shouldn't feel bad at all if you can't do this. Most people can't. Most people, this is likely a detrimental move for them, but for some artists, they can push through. And if that's you, and you can force it and not damage yourself, consider just forcing your will through. Lastly, consider taking a break. Sometimes you burn out, and that's just where the art block comes from. If you are burned out, then taking a break for a limited amount of time may be the healthiest thing you can do. I would encourage you that if you decide to do so, you also commit to re-engaging at some point, just like I mentioned earlier. Maybe before you break, take some time and devise what you will dive into when you come back. This can help to avoid some of the awkwardness when you come back to your art in a few days or weeks. Well, those have been some methods for dealing with art block in the moment. You are currently art blocked. But what about some preemptive approaches, some things that you can do ahead of time to prevent yourself from falling back into this trap, or if you're really fortunate, from running into it in the first place? Established routines. I may harp on this a lot on the channel, but I really do think that schedules and routines are one of the most beneficial things we can put time into as artists. The reason is twofold. One, we as artists need them more than other people on average. As people who tend towards creative whims and innovation, having structure to reliably fall back on is super beneficial. The second reasoning is that having a routine built is a habit. It's easy to do and easier to do the more you do it. So take a look at your time availability and your time needs and try to devise something that will help you in this regard. If you want a video specifically dedicated to building a schedule, let me know in the comments. I love building schedules. I love spreadsheets. I'm weird like that, and I would happily put one together if there's some desire for it. Try diversifying your inspiration sources. This might sound odd, but it can be the catalyst to moving forward. If your inspirations are homogeneous, if they all come from similar sources, when you hit a breaking point, you have a singular column of potential inspiration to hold you aloft. Differing what you take in, the sources you breathe in art from, the kinds of art you consume, will help you find a new way to move forward. This works for the same reason that having multiple projects going simultaneously works. You have other directions and places to go. Art block does not always block all artistic pathways, usually just the one you mess with the most. And if you have other avenues open, then you have other places that you can move to. Try to keep learning. Make sure you always have something that you're focusing on as far as learning goes. If you have the ability, take some classes, and if not, save up a playlist on YouTube of similar videos on a particular topic. Here's an example. If you want to work on anatomy, set up a playlist for yourself for learning anatomy. Go search for it, and when you find videos that grab your interest, shove them into that playlist. Maybe watch a couple seconds or a minute of each just to make sure that they're beneficial for you, and then save it. You are constructing a makeshift class for yourself that can be something to turn to when or if art block strikes, or just to keep you from hitting it in the first place. If you can afford to purchase some classes, they can dismantle this as well. They are a resource to fall back into when you cannot manage to find an idea or inspiration to move forward in that particular moment. Keep your workload balanced. This is tough, and we are all so different. Don't be ashamed if you feel like you cannot handle as much as another. That aspect of art is not a competition. Try to think about the work you can accomplish in a given time, the amount of work that doesn't drive you to jump out a window, and work backward then to discover how much you can achieve on a weekly basis. This is a struggle for many of us, myself included. I get excited, I want to keep moving forward even when it's not the best thing for me. I have to draw up a schedule every so often and think about how many hours a week I can actually sink into art when I have so many other things to manage. Work toward balance. Don't try to do it all in one go, just try to adjust slowly. And give yourself some grace. This transition is difficult. Seek joy in your art making. This is the reason we got into it, right? Like, we do this because it's fun, because we get to bring things to life, because hopefully we're decent at it, because it's exciting. Like, there's so many reasons that we dive into art, and most of them come back to excitement, happiness, and joy at some level. If you are like most of us, then this is what got you into making art in the first place. Probably when you were a little kid, there was something exciting about it. Maybe people told you you did a good job. Maybe you've been chasing that people-pleasing aspect, but there's still happiness and joy that comes from making other people happy through your work. So pursue art, seek joy in your art making. And this joy is communicated in some ethereal way to the observer. So if you are happier while you made your art, I sincerely believe that that happiness comes across to the person who's perceiving it. In the same way as a writer who was really sad when they wrote a tragic scene, I feel like some of that is communicated to us as the audience. Maybe that's weird, like hippie, ethereal nonsense, but the world is not entirely math and science. The entirety of creation cannot be boiled down to zeros and ones. It's not that simple. So joy is important for longevity as well. If you want to stay in this and create for a long period of time, you have to have joy. You have to find it. So just make sure you dedicate some time toward that. The more joy you have in a thing, the easier it is to avoid art block. It's not going to prevent it entirely, nothing can, but it will help you to prevent it. And then try new things to rekindle that joy, because joy can sometimes be fickle. Usually happiness is much more fickle, but joy can also wane like the tides sometimes. So put time into trying new things, new opportunities to find and cultivate joy. Finally, on our long list of things here, take care of your body and your mind. I talked in a recent podcast about artist self-care, so I won't reiterate too much here, but suffice it to say, you make better art and you can make art longer when you take care of yourself. Make sure that you get enough sleep. Eat better, or if you don't eat enough because you're working on your artwork too long, just eat more. Get outside and wander around in the beautiful world. Take care of you as the artist. Your artwork is important, but you know what? You are more important than your artwork. At least for now. Maybe 100 years from now, when you are long dead and your artwork is the only piece of you that still exists, maybe then it will be more important, but I would still wager that you as a human are more important than the art. So take care of yourself. Put time and effort into you. You're important, you are valid, and the world needs more people like you who are making things, who are creating, who are lovingly and joyfully crafting objects and ideas. Thank you. Well, as always, thank you for listening. This has been a longer podcast, but this is a complicated topic and I wanted to cover a lot of different angles on it. So I hope that there was just one nugget of beneficial something in this for you. And thank you for your time. Thank you for listening and participating in these. If you have anything else that I have missed, something that is important that you feel like would make a good podcast for a follow-up to this, please let me know in the comments below. And with all that said, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.